Hello, I want to point out the absurdity of evolution and the evidence, how everything is assumed and nothing is proved, and how they use homology as the basis of their evidence, really. Like, essentially, similarities prove a common ancestor. But let's look at the evidence. I wanted to know the evidence of the eye. What was my question? How did the first eye evolve? And it said exactly what I thought it would say. The evolution of the eye is a pretty wild story. It's thought that eyes started as simple light-sensitive cells, maybe even just patches of skin and that could detect light and dark. Over time, these cells became more complex, eventually leading to the formation of pits or cups that could detect direction and movement. From there, lenses developed and viola eyes as we know them. Want the super detailed sciencey version? So it's pretty much a Schumann, just those stories. They started as light sensitive cells. Over time, the cells became more complex, eventually leading to formation of pits and cups. You know, that is pretty much all they can say. But I said, yes, do you want the super detailed sciencey version? This is AI. Yes, and it's getting the information off. This is what they say, so don't say the AI is wrong. Tell me where the AI is wrong here. This is what you all say. This is what the articles say. This is what I knew it would say. Okay, so this is the more in-depth version. The evolution of the eye is believed to have started, so evolution is just a believed to have started with simple light-sensitive cells, likely similar to those found in modern flatworms. These cells allowed organisms to detect light and darkness, providing a basic sense of their environment. See, so very scientific. They're just pointing out that flatworms have light-sensitive cells. But this is their explanation. Over time is the magic time daddy thingy. Throw in some time. Some of these cells became concentrated in specific areas. Wow. That's convenient. So these flatworms keep reproducing, but somehow the light sensitive patches became concentrated in specific areas. Wow. See what rubbish evolution is? This is evolution. This is your religious story. The book of... You might as well just write a book and call it the Evolution Bible and just have your stories in it of what you believe. And it's not based on any evidence. From flatworms, light sensitive, but then they will point out facts, like they'll say there's a flatworm has light sensitive eyes, light sensitive cells. But then they've got to just add this: over time, some of these cells became concentrated. Right, so they formed light sensitive patches or eye spots. Wow, eye spots just eventually formed, and these early eye spots probably couldn't form images but could detect movement and direction. Probably. Isn't that amazing? And the next big leap, because there's big leaps, was the development of a pit-like structure, like a pinhole camera, which allowed for more directional detection of light. This is seen in modern Nautilus eyes. So see how they're using... But they say it's seen in modern Nautilus eyes, but they're pointing out biological structures that exist, right, between the flatworm, light-sensitive cell and the Nautilus eye, the modern Nautilus eye. But there's a huge... But to bridge that gap, they've got to say over time some of these cells become concentrated. So they've got to invent these just so stories to bridge the gap. There's no possible, observable, demonstrable way of bridging that huge gap. So they point out biological structures and they just fill in the gaps with stories. Lenses eventually evolved, likely from transparent cells. likely, so probably likely, that helped focus light. This led to more complex eyes, like our own, capable of forming detailed images. So they went from a Nautilus eye to ours. But all you got to do is add the magic time, Daddy. The process took hundreds of millions of years, with various stages appearing in different species. Want more on this? So, see how they do the so typical. They make up these just so stories, and they use existing eyes as different stages. Different species show different evolutionary development. So it's so predictable, and it's not science. They're just taking what we see today, pun intended, and making up an evolutionary narrative behind it and adding time to give it credibility. Let's dive deeper, because I said yes. Want more on this? Let's dive deeper. The development of lenses is thought to have occurred through the process called convergent evolution, where different species like octopus and humans develop similar solutions to the problem of focusing light. Right? So they're taking similarities now. So you have comparisons with different species. You have all these assumptions, and then homology, the magic of homology, and time, and the magic of homology. It's all, and they call this science. It's all just telling stories. How much are facts in this narrative, and how much are just making stuff up? Okay, one theory is that lenses form from transparent cells that help protect and focus light. Wow, they just did it. Over time, these cells became more specialized, eventually forming the lenses we see today. Okay, I've heard this one. Some scientists think the PAX6 gene, which controls eye development, played a key role in this process. This gene is found in a wide range of species, from fruit flies to humans, and is thought to have been present in the common ancestor of all animals with eyes. Want more on the genetics behind evolution? So apparently the human and the fruit fly had a common ancestor, and the only evidence is this PAX6 gene. But it controls eye development, right? But the fruit fly and the human eye is completely different. So it activates the development of the eye, but you need the entire information of the fruit fly eye and the human eye to actually to create the eye itself. So one little similarity isn't evidence that we have a common ancestor, because they can only bridge the gap between the fruit fly and the human eye by making all these assumptions. So I said, want more on the genetics behind it? Yes, I do. It doesn't really show how the information created. Remember that. They're just taking facts and then building up an evolutionary narrative around it. The PAX6 gene is a master control gene, essentially a switch that turns on the development of eyes in embryos. It's super interesting. Right, so you need this PAX6 gene to activate the development of eyes. But how did they develop without it? So what developed first, the PAX6 gene or the eye itself? So somehow the eye started to evolve without the PAX6 gene, but then the PAX6 genes started creating the eye. What come first, the chicken or the egg? This same gene controls eye development in vastly different species like mice and fruit flies. Well, of course, you've got to activate the eye, or how else is it going to develop in the womb? You've got to have information to activate biological mechanisms. But that's how they are created in the womb. They are developed in the womb. They don't evolve gradually over time. All the information is already preset, and it develops over time in the womb and nowhere else. He's not explaining how the PAX6 gene was created, not explaining how the information, what came first, the information or the light sensitive cell, and then how did it become codependent so that you cannot have one without the other. Doesn't say all that sort of stuff, and evolutionists don't question it. They blindly well, they can't question it because the only other answer is God. So ultimately, they say, "Well, you saying that God did it? All this complex information, this PAX6 gene, which is a common design in many species, it shows a common designer, and the information itself for each eye is specific, right? That's how we get the human eye, with specific information. But when it says here, it talks about actual what scientists have actually done, right? What can they do? In fact, scientists have done some wild experiments where they have swapped the PAX6 gene from a mouse into a fruit fly, and it still triggers eye development. It's a great example of how conserved this gene is across species. So they're working with information that already exists. Okay, and we all know that all life is built upon the same information, but none of this even remotely explains how the information came or which came first. It's all just those stories. Because it says here, listen to this, the PAX6 gene regulates a bunch of other genes involved in eye development. But those other genes ain't the same. Right? It's different because a fruit fly eye and a mouse eye and a human eye are different. Right? Obviously. So the PAX6 gene regulates a bunch of other genes. Well, which came first, the bunch of other genes or the PAX6 gene? And if the PAX6 gene job is to regulate these other genes, what came first? How did it all come together just so? You know, it all works as a complete process. Which is very complex. All I see is complex design here, vastly complex design that exists, and evolutionists are just making up these glib, asinine, just so stories, and taking a few facts to make it sound like science. But anyway, the PAX6 gene regulates a bunch of other genes involved in eye development, like those involved in forming the lens, retina, and cornea. But listen to this. Here's the clincher. Mutations in PAX6 gene can lead to eye disorders, like aniridia in humans. So mutations only... They mention one mutation in the whole process, and it actually leads to disorders. There's no beneficial mutations. How did the PAX6 gene develop if mutations create disorders? So it actually, see how evolutionists don't think. See how I'm thinking. When I read this, I'm thinking, not accepting it as gospel. And I cannot afford to think, because I'm a Christian and I believe that God created the universe. I mean, it said in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. So if God can create the heaven and earth, he can do anything else. Nothing in the Bible is too hard for God. So the question is whether God exists or not. The question isn't whether God can. Because it says in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Right? It's a question of whether God exists. And it's a question of whether all this complex stuff can just form, or is it the proof of intelligent design? And of course atheists have got to invent a convenient just so story. But anyway, mutations in the PAX6 gene can lead to eye disorders. Right, so how did mutations create the PAX6 gene in the first place? Or any of the other genes, if mutations create disorders? Want to explore more on the genetic shift to do something else. So I said, so how did all the separate parts of the human eye evolve gradually? Because it's very vague. And then it says the evolution of the human eye is a pretty epic story of increment changes. An epic story. Yes, it is an epic story. That's all is a story. Let's break it down. Light sensitive cells. So the story is basically the same one again. Simple organisms develop light sensitive cells, like similar to those in modern flatworms. So it's just going through the established dogma, the established narratives. And then eye spots. See, it's not telling you how that happened. It's not telling you how mutations created this. And the only evidence they had for a mutation causes harm. But somehow we're to believe that beneficial mutations can happen, and that they created all this somehow. Then eye spots. These cells concentrated in specific areas, forming light-sensitive patches. Did they? They just did that without intelligent design. They just did it somehow. And then pit-like structures. Eye spots deepened into pits, allowing for directional detection. Then pinhole eyes. The pit closed, forming a pinhole. The pit closed. Listen to this. They're just saying just so stories. Camera-like structures like nautilus eyes. So it's just giving more in-depth just so stories on each individual just so story. Lens formation. Transparent cells filled the pinholes, eventually forming a crude lens. Lens refinement. The lens became more curved, allowing for focusing. Iris pupil development. And you know what? Atheists will say every step of the development of the eye has been worked out. They'll say, yes, here it is. Here's the evidence. And I'll say, but these are just so stories. And they'll say, but I showed you the evidence, and so you just won't accept it. But it's not evidence, it's just so stories. Come on. But you have to stick to your pathetic, evolutionary, dogmatic indoctrination story, because you want nothing to do with God, and that is the problem. It's not because you're evil and wicked, and in that sense, because God is holy, and you're completely different to God. We all are. That's not the problem. The problem is that you want to lie, to keep remaining like that. You don't want to change. You don't want to come to God to change. That's the whole thing. That's why this is all happening. This is why God allowed it all to happen, because He wants you to come to Him and want to change. It's all about morality. At the end of the day, it's all about morality and what you want to do. If you hate God and you hate the Bible because of its moral standard, and it's God's moral standard on His creation, on what He commands us to do, and it's the demonstration of whether you want to obey God or not, or obey your flesh. And you have to invent these lies. It's not stories in the Bible, because you say the Bible's just made up stories. But your whole evolutionary thing is just made up stories. Right here. Retina and cornea development. The light-sensitive cells and supporting tissue formed the retina, with a transparent cornea protecting it. So they're just describing what the retina and cornea are, and just saying that they just formed. Each step provided some advantage. So you're saying all these steps happened gradually? They're all just made up. So each step provided some advantage, like detecting movement or seeing better in low light. Over millions of years, these changes added up to the complex eye we have today. See, over millions of years, they just add the time. You can't see that this is just made up stuff, that there's no way to demonstrate how beneficial mutations can do this, or did do this. Want more details on specific parts, and I just put a picture of an eye. Explain how each component in the eye evolved. And it says the image shows the human eye, and that these labelled parts, it goes through the thing, written or whatever, so that the sclera, whatever it is, evolved as a tough outer layer. So it's just saying, it just explains it and says evolved. Early versions were simple fibrous layers that provided structural support. What do you mean, early versions? How do they know? That's just a made-up story. Cornea developed from the transparent surface tissue that originally protected light-sensitive cells. Over time, it became a clear, refractive surface to help focus light. See, they just say over time. It's just all made up. Pupil formed as an opening in light-sensitive pits that could regulate. So see how it's building upon the previous just so stories? Not facts. Pupil formed as an opening in light-sensitive pits that could regulate. Remember, it just said pits formed over time. So it's saying formed as an opening in light-sensitive pits that could regulate light entry. It evolved to become a controllable aperture managed by muscles. Wow, it evolved. See how it's just all stories. Nothing here has produced any evidence And the evidence would be beneficial mutations that can create new information. There's absolutely nothing there. The lens originated from transparent cells, filling a pinhole eye, gradually becoming a flexible focusing lens. See? This is their evidence. Iris evolved from muscle tissue surrounding the pupil to control light intake by adjusting pupil size. Wow, all this happened somehow. Conjunctiva developed as a thin protective substance. It's all, they've got no evidence. Want deeper detail. The sclera likely started as a simple fibrous. You want more detail? There's no detail. It's just more detail on the stories. Evolutionary, the sclera likely started as a simple fibrous sheath. See? But it doesn't explain what was all the other parts doing, and when did they come in, and how did they come in, and what did what before. It's just all just made up stories. And I just say, these explanations sound like just those stories rather than observable facts. And it says, fair call, you're right. Evolutionary explanations can sometimes sound like just those stories without direct evidence. But then it says the evolution of the eye is supported by multiple lines of evidence, but that's a lie. Because they go back to the established dogma. Fossil records showing gradual eye structures. No, the fossils don't show straight. There are no fossils that show gradual eye structures. What they're saying is different species have different eyes, and they're saying those different eyes show gradual eye structure. But see how deceptive the evidence is. This is their mountain of evidence. And then they do homology, comparative anatomy across species. So first of all, they're saying comparative anatomy amongst fossils show gradual eye structures, and then they're saying comparative anatomy amongst living species show gradual eye evolution. So they're just saying there are different eyes and evolution did it. And then they say genetic studies like PAX6 gene conservation. So they're saying because a lot of species have this gene that activates the development of the eye is proof that we had a common ancestor. So they're going back to homology. But they did mention that mutations in the PAX6 gene causes problems, that the eye won't develop properly. Right? So the only observable mutation in this whole narrative is a bad one. And then they say observable studies of eye development in embryos. Now, eyes don't evolve in embryos. They are created according to specific information. So see how there's the information of the eye. So you can't win with atheists, because I'll just say this is evidence, and we showed the evidence, and you don't believe the science. No, I don't believe the BS. Fossil records don't show gradual eye structure. You're just comparing different species' eyes and saying that shows different gradual evolution. That's like saying a fruit fly's eye, a mouse's eye, and a human eye. There's different stages in evolution. No, they're different species created according to specific information, and none of this. See, so similarities for sclera specifically, comparative anatomy shows similar structural support in different species' eyes. So there it is, homology. But I said homology isn't evidence of evolution. It's just comparing similar designs and assuming that evolution did it. And the AI said, you're calling out the assumption behind homology. But see, atheists won't do this. At least the AI can't lie, because it can't think. It just responds to what you say. So it says you're calling out the assumption behind homology. Homology shows similar structures in different species, but interpretation of this data can vary. In science, homology is observed and described. Similar structures are present. The debate is about what this means, common design or common descent. So there it is. Debate is about common design or common descent. So, but an atheist would never logically follow the conversation. They'll say, oh, we showed you the evidence. We showed you every step. And you just don't believe the science. You're a science denier. But I pointed out that homology isn't evidence. And they said, you're calling out the assumption behind the homology. And it is. It's just taking homology and making assumptions. So it comes down to, the debate is about what this means, common design or common descent. You've got to be honest with yourself. Did you see any evidence there that would actually prove how the eye can evolve, how all the separate parts the eye can evolve, or did you just hear a whole bunch of over time this must have happened, or this probably happened? What did you see there? Did you see evidence for evolution, or did you see just a whole heap of made up stories? And they say that irreducible complexity has been debunked. You can't debunk something by just making stuff up. You can't prove evolution by just making stuff up. We can, as creation scientists, say, look, the development in the embryo does rely totally on genetic information, like the PAX6 gene, which without cannot activate the other information. So you need information to activate information. So it's multi-layered. For the development of the eye, you need the, where is it? The PAX, what was it? The PAX6? Where is it? PAX6, where is it? So just for the eye to develop, this is how the eye develops in the embryo. The PAX6 gene has to regulate a bunch of other genes to develop the eye, right? So you have multi-layered information. You need information to activate the information to design, to create the eye. And they can only explain this through just those stories. And the only mutation is, if you look at the mutation there, oh, you can't highlight it. Mutations in PAX6 can lead to eye disorders. So the only mutation they can actually mention creates harm, as all mutations do. So there you have it. But atheists will just fall back and say, well, what are you saying? God did it? Yeah, I'm saying God did it. Because he created the heaven and the earth. And if he can do that, he can do anything. It's not a matter of what God can do. He's a trillion times greater than you are, because he made you. So you can't judge God and his ability on your ability. God made you the way you are. And the fact that God can make you the way you are shows that he is far greater than you are, because you can't even begin to make anything like what he can make. You can make machines, but you can't make self-replicating machines. And even if you did, it would be intelligent design. And they wouldn't be able to evolve because they'd be limited to the information and the design that you created them by, as we all are. But genetic information is stacked with different shapes of biological mechanisms, like different coloured eyes, for instance. But different coloured eyes, or bigger nose or smaller noses, doesn't change the overall human anatomy, which is limited by the human genome, which is 23 pairs of chromosomes. There you have it. There are none so blind as those who won't see. And the evolution of the eye is just a completely made up scenario. So the next time you try and say, well, Christians just believe in a made up story in a book, you've also got to admit that the evolutionary story is just made up, and that it's all to do with interpretation, as even the AI admitted. And he said, in science, homology is observed and described, similar structures are present. The debate is about what this means, common design or common descent. And atheists have to say common descent because they can't admit in a common design, so it's not even objective. But there are none so blind as they that won't see, pun intended.